Hello and welcome to TALRadio. At TAL, we connect those who are willing to give to those who are in need. My lovely listeners and my beautiful audience, you're watching and listening to a wonderful series called Self-Coaching. And today on this topic, on this series, we would be talking about promoting accountability in teams, building a culture of accountability. So let's welcome Andrew Tallents. Andrew, welcome to TALRadio.
Hi, Sandy. It's lovely to be here again.
Thank you so much. So let me start by asking you, how can one define accountability? Like, do you feel, is it something like an ownership or it's a punishment?
Really good question. I think there are two ways to think about this. I think it certainly lands in the ownership more than punishment. So if we think about accountability from a personal perspective, what this means is I have thoughts in my head and things I intend to do, and therefore holding myself to account means that I do the things that I promise myself to do. So that's the first level of accountability. Hard to do for human beings generally, because we procrastinate quite a bit. The second, which we've talked a lot about in this series, is in relationships. So not just relationship with self, with other people. Sandy, if you asked me to come on this call today at this time, then if I say yes, then there is accountability in our relationship in me doing that. And if I don't, I've obviously broken the trust and we've lost some accountability. So many things don't get done in the world at every level because of a lack of accountability between two people and self. So I would say it's more around the empowerment and having the power as opposed to punishment.
All right. So with respect to the professional world, that's something that we cannot just ignore in our life. So, when we talk about leaders, when leaders talk about accountability, what do they often get wrong? Like, how should the team really understand it and take it in the high stride?
There are three things here to think about. So the first is, what is it that we commit to and agree to in terms of our responsibilities of those that we're serving? It's constantly having a reminder of that. So sometimes people put a mission statement up on the wall or some kind of purpose statement, and then people forget about it, a lot of the time. So it's actually really understanding what it is we've agreed to do, and when we demonstrate that we do it. So that's the first thing. And so many teams get that wrong because they don't even necessarily let people know what those are. The second is about the roles that we play in trying to deliver those. So I have a certain role in my life. Lots of people around me have their own roles, and agreeing what they are, and again, fulfilling the responsibilities in those roles. So it's actually doing the things we say we're going to do. And people get that wrong all the time again, because again, we either forget things or we didn't even remember in the first place we committed to it. And then the third element where teams tend to get it wrong is they usually have problems because of their saboteurs that we've talked about in the past, where they can't have the difficult conversations with people. And so even though they want to commit to something else, they don't have that conversation, and people start to misunderstand why they're not doing things. So there's lots of things. Most of my work that I get involved in when I'm coaching leaders is around the fact they find accountability really hard, because there are some hard discussions that need to be had.
That's true. Confrontations. Absolutely. So moving on, how would you define or probably differentiate accountability? First from blame, second from micromanagement, and third from control.
Well, they're all elements, again, where we actually get it wrong in accountability. So what blame is about is me shifting the responsibility to someone else and me losing all accountability. So if I was late for this call with you today and I would blame the weather or the transport or whatever it might be, that's me shifting the responsibility and me not taking accountability for my own time management. So we see that a lot where it gets brought in terms of an excuse. On the micromanagement, again, it's all about the role definitions that we have and how we're going to deliver what we say we're going to deliver. And if I have a lack of trust with somebody, even though we have accountability relationships in place, it sometimes means that I overstep the mark and I start to micromanage those people around me to try and get the results that we've all agreed we're going to get together. But then there's confusion, and again, people don't know where the accountability lies. It's just confusing. And then thirdly, which was the third one again? It was the...
Control.
Oh, yes. most leaders have got to the positions in life because they've appeared to be in control.
True.
And we've talked about this before, where you and I are not in control of anything that we do. We're in control about how we react to things. So again, people misinterpret that. It's about influencing, not control. And we can influence others to make sure they're accountable. We just cannot control other people around accountability. It's all around self, really, as we've discussed a lot in the series.
In fact, when you talked about blame, I think blame is the easiest thing to really get through. Probably even kids also suffer from the same syndrome, the blame syndrome. For everything, he did it or she did it, I didn't do it. I think probably that is something that's literally a very inherent feature, I would say.
I agree.
So moving on, what role does leadership behavior play in shaping accountability culture, especially when things do not go as planned?
Yeah, there are two elements to this, Sandy. So the first is to try and make sure it goes right in the first place. It's all about the leader establishing real clarity. So we all know we've sat in different rooms, both at home and at work, where we thought we were going to be doing something, and then suddenly the leader starts doing something else. And there's a real misunderstanding. There's real confusion about what's going on. So if everyone is clear about what needs to get done in this moment and what the roles are of everyone that needs to get done in this moment and what we've agreed that we're going to do in those roles in this moment, and there's all clarity, that's a great starting point. So the leader has to establish that to begin with, which is all about clear communication. Where it tends to go wrong is where people start to forget about those various roles, forget about the accountability, or start to have that self-sabotage where they get in their own way, which we've talked about a lot in the past. So the only way a leader can actually establish and re-establish accountability when things start to go wrong is almost, in a sports analogy, almost have a timeout. I do this a lot with teams. I coach teams, and it's very empowering. And what we do is maybe if people are starting to blame each other or forgetting what they should be doing, I just call a timeout and say, what's going on? What's happening right now? And we just basically chat about it. So you need almost to have that line in the sand that says, look, we've all forgotten what it is we should be doing here, and we're actually confusing things and we're being inefficient. Let's reset and just, again, agree what accountability was. And the leader has to provide the leadership to do that. But both of those things, Sandy, take time. And a lot of CEOs, leaders out there find it very difficult to create time in this technological world we live in. And it's one of the first things that we talk about. Time is so important. You need to create it to be able to establish those rules and those boundaries and have the reset.
So I think another dig that I'm going to take at the leaders, the CEOs, or the people at at a certain level, a leadership level in life. So can you actually share a live example where a leader, actually owned a mistake and it literally changed, the way team owns accountability in a better way, I would say?
Yeah, there was a leader I worked with once who wasn't that vulnerable with their team, and there were regular occurrences where the team were asking things of the leader, and the leader couldn't always hear what they were asking because he had a hearing problem. But he didn't want to admit, this is something that had come on during his time as the leader, and he didn't want to admit vulnerability that he couldn't hear properly. It was a sign of him getting older, etc. And so he couldn't admit it. And therefore, one day he opened up to one of the team to say that the reason that he's not necessarily been hearing and managing and leading properly is because he's not been hearing everything. They were just thinking he's ignoring us. He doesn't really understand what it is we're trying to do. So that was one great example where the leader and the team worked together to actually understand that the accountability measures they put in place and agreed weren't being done, not because of anyone being difficult, but just because there was constant misunderstanding. So the leader had to show vulnerability to admit that, and then they could find a solution.
That's quite interesting, actually. It's like nobody to blame here, at least.
No, and there isn't normally anything. Sure. This is what we said before. We're not in control of anything, and the things happen, like things are happening out there right now. It's how we react and how we reset, and then make sure we know what we can be accountable for.
And something, that I think we really need to, kind of a takeaway from this episode is like, assumptions are really bad sometimes.
All the time. Again, many clients I work with, I say to them, how does your boss or your board feel about you this week? And they'll say, well, I think they think I'm okay and I'm doing all right. And I go, you think they do? Have you not asked them? And of course, we're afraid of asking about how we're doing because we don't want to hear the worst. But this is very interesting. Leaders are not very good at getting their stakeholders to hold them to account generally. So going to ask them, what is it you're expecting? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to do it? And then understanding how they're measuring us. Very few leaders go and seek that kind of input. But again, it's very, very good practice to go and do that.
True. Amazing. So moving on, I really wanted to understand that, how does lack of clarity around roles, goals, and success metrics quietly kill accountability in teams? Like if there is no clarity around.
Yeah, it links to what we were saying a little bit before. So first of all, let's link to how people are measuring those goals. Okay, so people are measuring those goals. That's external commentators, it's board directors, it's shareholders, it's customers. And so therefore, we need to know with clarity what the goals are in the first place. And again, have those written down. We're all agreed to them. We actually keep referring back to them when we're looking at our review meetings. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the roles then is very interesting because a job description is not a role. A job description is what people have given me to say, these are the tasks that we expect you to do. So what we tend to find is that job descriptions don't always actually define the role properly. The role is also about how the individual person shows up in relation to that job description. They could take a role where they're a cheerleader, where they're a critic, where they're a confidant, where they're someone who plays devil's advocate and actually always asks that difficult question and still does the job that they're asked to do, but it's the role they're playing in that team. So we've got to make sure that the roles are agreed in delivering the goals. And then it's all about making sure that how we do that is in such a way that it gets the most effective results from us. So clarity is really required all the time. As soon as somebody starts scratching their head or wondering why, they've got to ask the question and look as though they don't know, what are we doing here? What are we missing? And again, so many people don't do that because they don't want to look stupid.
Talking about job description, I would really say a small comment from my side. It's like, it's probably not even the smallest fraction or probably segment of the kind of role that you really require to do later on once you join the company.
Absolutely.
It literally says nothing about what you're getting into.
Well, what I love there, just a quick addendum, Sandy. So I've seen it before where new people have come into an organization taking up a role where somebody's left. And what they do is, even though they're different people, because the role has existed in the organization for years, it has this momentum because they go to meetings that the role is supposed to go to. They have admin support, which the role is supposed to have. And before you know it, even before you establish yourself in the role is already taking on a life of its own with you in it. And if we don't do anything to set again the accountability about how we appear in that role, before we know it, we're just reacting to everything. So it's fascinating.
Very true. So moving on, what kind of practical tools or ritual can really help a team align to ownership and expectations from the leaders as well?
There's some great examples that we can do here, which a lot of businesses don't do. And it's very courageous. So the first thing is what's called doing some stakeholder expectation management. So a stakeholder could be a shareholder, it could be a customer, it could be a supply chain partner, it could be somebody who is actually a sponsor, somebody who's an investor. And these are all different people who have their own expectations of what the goals are the team is trying to achieve and indeed how they are going to achieve them. So what a good tool to do is to actually either send out a written questionnaire or ideally go and meet these people face to face or online and ask them a series of questions establishing what it is you're expecting of us, what goals you're expecting and how you're expecting us to get there, and bringing all of those different stakeholder views into the room of the leadership team so they can start to work out what is it that we need to listen to here and what is it we need to work before. So rather than us just deciding what the goals are and how we're going to do it, we've got input from everybody. So that's the first thing. We need to understand stakeholder expectations. The second thing then, as a team, is to actually be very assertive with all those stakeholders to go back and say, we've listened to all of you, and actually with the resources we have right now, where we are right now, we can only achieve X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and that's what we're going to achieve. So it's actually pushing back to the stakeholders, having clarity around it, and being very clear about the roles that the team are playing in relation to that, and having a feedback mechanism 2, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months down the line, asking those stakeholders, how are we doing against the measures we put in place that we said we're going to deliver against? So many teams are really bad at doing these practical things because they don't want to fail. and they're afraid of asking the question. But if we know that we're not meeting expectations, we can do something about it. So they're the tools that tend to be at our disposal in terms of senior leadership teams.
All right. So talking about accountability, one thing, I think we've really discussed this in the previous episode also, but I'm sure people would love to listen because that is something that really concerns them. When we talk about conversation regarding accountability, how should it really be handled basically in meetings?
It does come back to something we talked about before, so we'll remind the audience. There's something around us in a nice way, it doesn't have to be in a horrible way, reminding the other person what it is that we remember about what they agreed to do. So, for example, Sandy, you agreed to turn up on this call at this time, and we agreed to have half an hour. We agreed that you were going to ask me some questions, and yet you turned up 10 minutes late, and I just want to understand, was that what we agreed? So it can be very difficult. Sometimes we have to be assertive, kind, pleasant, be curious to find out what's going on with the other person, and then understand how we can recontract together, how we can agree again, how we move forward. When it's something that we've done and we've broken an agreement or an accountability, I'm not saying we need to do all this all the time. There needs to be some kind of acknowledgement and admission of that. I would say it's good to go as far as apologize to the other person. Some people find that very difficult, but to apologize that I've not held my side of my accountability agreement with you, and to say that what is it I can do to make that up, and how can we agree to move forward. So they're the ways that it can work in a relationship. I think what also works very well is managing expectations. So if you say to me, Andrew, can you do this? And I say yes, but I had no idea how I was going to do it, then that's not going to help either of us. So it's easier for me to say to you, well, I can do 2 of the things you've asked me to do. I can't do the 3rd one because I just don't know how. So it's just having those honest conversations. Honesty is always the best policy.
Oh, as they say, always.
Always.
So, when you just talked about apologizing, it's something that, a very honest thing, basically. I remember, I read it like long back, especially when we were kids. 3 magical words. Sorry, thank you, and please.
Absolutely.
Your life is so sorted.
Absolutely.
So moving on, if a leader really wants to start building a culture of accountability at this moment, what are the first 3 actions they should really take into consideration?
This is something we've talked about in the past, but it's very relevant now. So this particular individual who recognizes they need to do this, it's understanding and having real clarity about what is it I'm expected to achieve right now in this moment in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And not everyone has that. So have real clarity on that and check in with your stakeholders. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we've talked about in the past, which is then the next step, is to do the approach of essentialism, which we've talked about, which is saying reaching those goals that I now know are expected to achieve. What is it that I need to do that only I can do in the next 2 or 3 weeks that I need to do to hold myself to account? And everything else I shouldn't do. That's very difficult. It's a real discipline. And then the third thing, which is probably the most important, recognizing what my goals are and what I've agreed to and what I need to let go of, is what help is there around me, not just within my team, but my other relationships, that can help me to get there if I'm letting go of those things. And how do I actually manage them and lead them so we have this accountability relationship between us, so I know they're going to do the things that I need to let go of, so I don't need to worry about them. So they're the 3 steps really: goal, essentialism, what can I let go of? And then thirdly, managing those that are going to take up the slack around the resources. And if leaders can do those 3 things, they're going to make some very quick steps forward.
So that was all about leaders. We're talking about the team now. I really wanted to understand, what kind of mind shift can really transform accountability that is fear-based to ownership-driven?
Teams find this very difficult if the leader is driving the culture through fear. So let's talk about the 2 examples. So if the leader is really driving the culture through fear, then what the team needs to do collectively, but probably having a conversation without the leader in place, is to have a session with the leader where all of them who are in the team say to the leader, we want to do this differently. We want to have a different way of managing ourselves to account. It's very hard to do because if the leader is someone that is someone that can be very scared of, and they've got a lot of authority and power, and we've seen this in various political establishments, it can be very difficult. And at that point, if they can't do it for any reason, the team members tend to leave around that. Now, if there's fear in the organization, but the leader themselves isn't creating that fear, it's just within the culture, then they can actually say to the leader, look, we want a different way of doing this. Can we find a different way of actually holding ourselves to account and our various stakeholders? And on a week-to-week basis, put very small steps in place where we can do something called feed forward, which is something that Marshall Goldsmith created, where we're catching people changing behavior in a positive way in the moment and giving them feedback by saying, look, I saw that you did this. It means we can reduce the culture of fear. It really helped in accountability, and I want to see more of that. So I think that topic you just raised is one of the most difficult ones, because if we're in that kind of culture and we're not the absolute leader, we have to make a decision about whether to put up with it, cope with it, or leave.
Leave. Well, it's time for us to leave as well on that note. So I'm sure people after listening to this would really start, promoting accountability, not in just the professional life, but in their personal lives as well. So on that wonderful note, I'll wrap up this lovely segment in this wonderful series called Self-Coaching. Stay tuned into TALRadio.